The nurse who saved my life never touched a scalpel. She was a 62-year-old night shift nurse named Darlene, who had been working the pre-op ward at Mercy General Hospital in Nashville, Tennessee for 23 years, and who had seen enough in those 23 years to know when something was wrong, even when she could not immediately explain what it was. She grabbed my hand at 5:47 in the morning when I was lying in a hospital bed in a paper gown waiting to be wheeled into surgery for a procedure that my doctor had told me was routine. She leaned close and she said it quietly. Way people say things they are not entirely sure they should be saying. Your wife was here last night, late, after visiting hours. She signed something at the nurse's station. I don't know what it was, but something about it felt wrong, and I have been doing this job for 23 years, and I need you to know before they take you back. I want you to ask to see whatever she signed before you let them operate. Look at her face. This was not a woman who was confused or mistaken or inventing drama at 5:47 in the morning. This was a woman who had spent 2 decades watching people at the worst moments of their lives and had developed the specific radar that comes from paying attention for that long. I said, what did she look like? She described my wife perfectly. Then she said she was not alone. I asked her to get my doctor. I told them I was not going into surgery until I saw whatever had been signed at that nurse's station the night before. My name is David Calloway. I am 47 years old. I am a commercial real estate developer based in Nashville, Tennessee. I have been building things in this city since I was 26 years old, starting with a single 4-unit rental property. I bought with a loan my father co-signed, and moving forward from there one deal at a time, over 21 years until I had a portfolio that I am not going to put a number on publicly, but that presents 2 decades of work and discipline and more missed dinners and canceled weekends than I can count. I have 3 children. Marcus, who is 19 and in his first year at the University of Tennessee. Claire, who is 16 and wants to be a marine biologist. And Ryan, who is 13 and is currently convinced he is going to play professional baseball, which I am not discouraging because at 13, you should be allowed to believe that. Their mother and I have been divorced for 6 years. Her name is Sandra, and she is a good mother, and we have a functional co-parenting relationship, and that part of my life is fine. The woman who was at that hospital the night before my surgery was my second wife. Her name was Jennifer. We had been married for 3 years. We met at a charity event in 2021. And she was 34 and beautiful and warm, and she laughed at things that were actually funny, which sounds like a low bar, but is harder to find than you would think. I fell for her completely, and I am not embarrassed to say that. I am embarrassed about some other things, but not that. We had what I believed was a good marriage. I believed that the way you believe things when you have decided to trust someone and have reorganized your perception of every small inconsistency to fit that decision. There were small inconsistencies. There were always small inconsistencies. I filed them the way people file things they do not want to look at directly. Under miscellaneous. Under probably nothing. Under I am sure, there is a reasonable explanation.
Ow.
The surgery was for a heart arrhythmia. It's not dangerous in the immediate sense, but persistent and worsening in my. Cardiologist Dr. Patricia Osei had recommended an ablation procedure which was minimally invasive and had a very high success rate, in which I had scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. Before any procedure of that nature, you are asked to designate a medical power of attorney, someone who can make decisions on your behalf if you are incapacitated. I had designated Jennifer. She was my wife. That is what you do. 2 days before the surgery, I had also met with my estate attorney Gerald to update my general durable power of attorney. Standard pre-procedure review. Gerald had been my attorney for 11 years. He was 60 years old and meticulous, and he had the specific professional thoroughness of someone who had seen enough situations go wrong to never assume anything was obvious. We went through everything together. I left his office at 4 in the afternoon feeling organized and prepared the way you feel when you have done the responsible adult things, and now you can just go forward. I checked into Mercy General at 9 the following evening for pre-op preparation. Jennifer drove me. She was attentive and warm, and she held my hand in the car and said she would be there first thing in the morning when I woke up. I said I knew she would. She kissed me at the entrance and said she loved me, and I said I loved her, and she drove away, and I walked in and checked in and was shown to my room and had the specific half sleep of someone who is not particularly frightened but whose body understands that tomorrow is not a normal day. At 5:47 in the morning, Darlene grabbed my hand. I asked to see the forms. The charge nurse on duty, whose name was Rebecca, was professional and careful, and she pulled the visitor log from the previous night. Jennifer had been there at 11:42 p.m. She had spoken with the night administrator. She had signed a document amending my medical power of attorney designation. She had changed the designated person from herself to a man named Scott Willard. I had never heard the name Scott Willard in my life. Rebecca showed me the amendment form. Jennifer's signature. My name on it. And under the new designated agent, Scott Willard. With a phone number and an address in Franklin, Tennessee, which is a suburb of Nashville, about 20 minutes from our house, I looked at that form for a long time. Then I asked Rebecca to call Dr. Osei. I told Dr. Osei I needed to postpone the surgery. She was concerned from a medical standpoint, and I understood that, and I told her I would reschedule as soon as possible, but that I had a personal situation that needed to be addressed before I could proceed. She was not happy. She was also professional, enough to understand that a patient has the right to make that decision, and that pushing someone into surgery they are not ready for creates its own category of problems. I called Gerald Fitch from my hospital room at 6:15 in the morning. Gerald answered on the fourth ring with the voice of a man who had been asleep and was not entirely surprised to be woken at this hour. Because in 23 years of estate law, he had learned that crises have no respect for business hours. I told him what the form said. There was a silence. Then he said, "David, I need you to do nothing. Not one thing. Do not call Jennifer. Do not call this Scott Willard. Do not go home. I am going to make 3 phone calls, and I am going to call you back within the hour. Can you stay at the hospital?" I said I was still in a hospital gown. He said, "Excellent. Stay exactly where you are." Gerald called back at 7:41. His voice had the particular quality it got when he had information that was going to be difficult to deliver and was organizing the delivery in real time. He said the medical power of attorney amendment was legally executed. Jennifer had brought a notary with her to the hospital the night before. The document was valid. Then he said the following sentence, which I want you to understand. I heard while sitting in a hospital bed in a paper gown with sensors still attached to my chest. He said, "David, I also found an amendment to your general durable power of attorney filed with the county recorder's office at 4:47 yesterday afternoon, approximately 40 minutes after you left my office." I said, "Say that again?" "The general durable power of attorney," he said. "The one we reviewed together on Tuesday. An amendment was filed yesterday afternoon, removing you as the primary decision-maker on your own accounts and designating Scott Willard as agent with full authority over financial and property decisions. In the event of your medical incapacity," I sat there in the bed and I thought about Jennifer holding my hand in the car. "I love you. Drive safe. First thing in the morning when you wake up." I said, "Gerald, who is Scott Willard?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am going to need a few more hours for that." Called back at 10:12. By that point, I had changed into my street clothes and was sitting in a consultation room that Rebecca had quietly arranged for me because she understood. Without being told that whatever was happening was something I needed privacy for, Gerald said Scott Willard was 31 years old. He was a personal trainer. He had been operating a private training business in Franklin, Tennessee for 4 years. He had no criminal record, had no public financial profile of any significance. He had, however, according to Gerald's contact, at a private investigation firm that Gerald had used for due diligence on business matters for 11 years, been in a relationship with a woman named Jennifer Calloway for approximately 18 months. Gerald said it the way he said difficult things, directly and with enough space afterward for the information to land before he continued. 18 months. I had been married to Jennifer for 3 years. She had been seeing Scott Willard for 18 of those 36 months. The amendment to the General Durable Power of Attorney had been drafted by an attorney in Brentwood, Tennessee, whose office I had never heard of. Gerald was already pulling the full filing. He said the amendment had been executed with Jennifer acting as my agent under an existing limited power of attorney I had given her 2 years ago. To handle a real estate closing when I was traveling, a routine document. It's the kind you give your spouse without thinking about it because they are your spouse, and that is what spouses do. She had used it to execute an amendment that would give Scott Willard control over my financial and property decisions if I was medically incapacitated. My surgery was scheduled for 7:30 in the morning. If everything had gone as planned, I would have been under general sedation by 7:45. A medically incapacitated man, with Scott Willard holding power of attorney over his estate, and Jennifer holding the door open. I thought about the portfolio. 21 years, every deal, every decision, every missed dinner and canceled weekend. I thought about Marcus and Claire and Ryan. I thought about Darlene, who had been doing her job for 23 years and had seen enough to know when something was wrong and had grabbed my hand at 5:47 in the morning and said, "I need you to know before they take you back." I called my divorce attorney for my first marriage. Her name was Patricia Hale, and she was 60 years old and had been practicing family law in Nashville for 32 years, and she had represented me in my divorce from Sandra, and she had told me at the end of that process that she hoped she would never hear from me professionally again, which she had meant as a compliment. I told her what I had. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I had always respected about her. When I finished, she said, "I need you to come to my office today," said. "I am still in a hospital gown." She said, "Go home, get dressed and come directly here. Do not stop anywhere else. Do not talk to Jennifer." I said, "Jennifer does not know the surgery was postponed." Tricia said, "Let us keep it that way for right now." I went home, changed, drove to Patricia's office. On West End Avenue, Gerald was already there. He'd been on the phone for 40 minutes before I arrived. Patricia had a yellow legal pad covered in notes. Gerald had his laptop open. They both looked like people who had been moving quickly and were not finished. "Moving," Patricia said, "here's what we know. Jennifer used the limited power of attorney from 2 years ago to execute the amendment to your General Durable Power of Attorney. That was technically within the scope of the document she held. However," she paused, "the amendment itself contains a provision that could be challenged on the grounds that it was executed in anticipation of a specific medical event without your knowledge or consent. That is not what limited powers of attorney are designed for." She looked at me. "Which is not airtight, David, but it is enough to file an emergency motion to void the amendment before it can be acted upon." Gerald said he had already identified 4 properties in my portfolio that would be immediately vulnerable to transfer or encumbrance. If Scott Willard were to exercise the authority the amendment granted, Patricia said we needed to move today. I said move. He filed an emergency motion in Davidson County Chancery Court at 2:14 that afternoon. Patricia argued that the amendment had been executed fraudulently, using a power of attorney instrument obtained under false pretenses, and used for a purpose outside its intended scope. The motion requested an immediate freeze on any transactions requiring agent authority under the amended document. The judge, whose name was Howard Clemens, and who Patricia had appeared before many times, granted a temporary restraining order. At 4:47, the same time the amendment had been filed the previous afternoon, I noticed that Patricia noticed me notice it. She said sometimes the timing is its own kind of poetry. We also filed a complaint with the Tennessee Board of Professional Responsibility against the Brentwood attorney who had drafted the amendment. Gerald had pulled his bar record. There were 2 prior complaints. Nothing that had resulted in discipline, but the pattern was there and it mattered. Jennifer called at 5:30. Her voice was warm the way it had been in the car. "David, how are you feeling?" I said. "Fine." She said the hospital called. They said the surgery was postponed. "Is everything okay?" I said everything is fine. I just needed a little more time. She said I can come over. I said do not worry about it. I said I would call her tomorrow. She said she loved me. I said thank you. I hung up and sat in Patricia's conference room and looked at the city through the window and thought about the specific quality of a lie that has been practiced until it sounds exactly like the truth. The restraining order held. Jennifer retained. An attorney 4 days later. Her attorney was competent and made arguments that were technically reasonable and legally insufficient. Patricia handled every one of them with the patience of someone who's been doing this for 32 years and has encountered every version of this particular situation. The full proceedings took 7 months. During those 7 months, several things happened. Gerald completed a comprehensive review of every document Jennifer had touched during our marriage and found 3 additional instruments that had been modified in minor ways that would have been difficult to detect individually, but formed a clear pattern when assembled together. Scott Willard was deposed. He was 31 years old and he was not a stupid man, but he was also not a man who had anticipated being in a deposition room across from Patricia Hale, who had been doing this for 32 years and who asked questions the way a surgeon uses a scalpel. By the end of the deposition, it was established that Scott Willard had known about the power of attorney amendment before it was filed, that he had discussed with Jennifer the timeline of my surgery and the window of incapacity it would create, and that he had communicated with the Brentwood attorney directly on 2 occasions in the weeks before my procedure. My divorce was finalized 8 months after the morning Darlene grabbed my hand. The settlement was structured around the fraudulent amendment and the breach of fiduciary duty Jennifer had committed by misusing the limited power of attorney. Patricia negotiated terms that protected the portfolio entirely. Jennifer received what she had brought into the marriage and nothing from what I had built. The Brentwood attorney received a formal censure from the Board of Professional Responsibility and is currently the subject of a civil suit from 2 other clients whose matters Gerald's contact identified in the course of our own investigation. Scott Willard was never charged with a crime. Documentary evidence established his knowledge, but not his direct participation in executing the fraud, and the threshold for criminal liability requires a higher standard than we could meet without. Significantly more time and resources than the outcome warranted. I chose to let that go. Not because I was not angry. I was. But because I had spent enough of my life building things and I did not want to spend whatever came next destroying them. I had the surgery in November. 8 months after the morning I postponed it. Dr. Asay performed the ablation. Everything went exactly as she had said it would. I was under sedation for 41 minutes. When I woke up, Patricia Hale was in the waiting room. I had asked her to be there, not as my attorney, just as someone I trusted to be there when I came back. She was reading a brief when they brought me out. She looked up and said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Surprisingly good." She said, "The arrhythmia." Said, "Apparently resolved." She said, "Good." Then she went back to her brief. That was exactly the right response. Marcus came home from Knoxville for Thanksgiving. That year, Claire made a presentation at the dinner table about bioluminescence in deep sea organisms that went 40 minutes longer than anyone had anticipated and was genuinely fascinating. Ryan struck out 3 batters in the backyard using a wiffle ball and a plastic bat and announced that he was ready for the draft. I sat at the end of my own table and looked at my 3 children and thought about a nurse named Darlene, who had been doing her job for 23 years and who had grabbed my hand at 5:47 in the morning and said something felt wrong. I sent her a card in December. I wrote 1 line inside. "You saved more than you know." She sent back a note 3 weeks later. It said, "I have sent a lot of people back to people who love them. It never gets old." I keep that note in my desk. Same drawer as the restraining order. Different reasons. Necessary. Here's what I know now that I want you to hear. The people who are trying to take something from you almost always depend on one thing: that you will not pay attention at the moment that matters most. They depend on the fact that you are tired or distracted or trusting or all 3 at once. And usually they are right. Usually people do not pay attention. But sometimes a woman who has been doing her job for 23 years grabs your hand in the dark and says something felt wrong. And you have a choice right then. You can pull away because you are tired and you have a procedure scheduled and your wife is coming first thing in the morning, or you can stop and look and ask to see what was signed. I stopped. I looked. What I found when I looked changed everything. Pay attention, especially when it is inconvenient to pay attention. Especially then. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And tell me if you have ever had someone outside your family see something your family was counting on you to miss. I want to know. Like this video if you believe that paying attention is its own kind of protection. And subscribe because next week I have a story that is going to hit just as hard as this one. I will see you there.